on the third state that goes beyond the traditional boundaries of life and death. It's definitely a fascinating topic, and I'm looking forward to discussing it further with you in our next chat. Sure, I'm ready to continue our conversation. Do you want to start by recapping the main points of the article, or do you have any specific questions you'd like to discuss regarding the third state? Sure, we can talk about the potential applications and future implications of the third state. Based on the article we discussed, the idea of the third state that goes beyond the traditional boundaries of life and death is a relatively new and controversial concept. It's difficult to predict exactly what the future will bring in terms of potential applications, but some possibilities could include advancements in medical treatments, end-of-life care, and even the blurring lines between life and death. However, more research and studies are needed to further understand the implications of this third state and its potential applications. It's true that cells do not decompose immediately after an organism dies, and there are several factors that can affect how quickly they break down. For example, the temperature and moisture level of the environment, as well as the presence of bacteria and other decomposers, can all play a role in how quickly cells decompose. Additionally, different types of cells can decompose at different rates, depending on their own internal structures and chemical makeup. However, over time, all cells will eventually decompose and break down, as the process of decomposition is a natural part of the cyclical process of life and death. Yes, it is possible to preserve a person's body in a different environment other than a grave. For example, some people choose to be cryogenically preserved after they die, which involves freezing the body in liquid nitrogen at extremely low temperatures in the hopes of being revived in the future. Other methods of preservation, such as mummification, have been used for thousands of years in various cultures around the world. These methods involve drying or chemically treating the body to prevent decomposition and slow down the natural breakdown of cells. Yes, that's correct. One option for preservation could be to place the body in a natural environment like a field with trees. This method is sometimes called green burials or natural burials, and it involves burying the body without a casket, liner, or embalming fluid, allowing it to decompose naturally. The body is wrapped in a biodegradable material and placed in a shallow grave, where it can decompose and provide nutrients for the soil and plants surrounding it. This method is seen as a more eco-friendly and natural alternative to traditional burials. Yes, it is also possible to preserve a body by placing it in the sea. This method is called marine burial or sea burial, and it involves placing the body in a biodegradable container and then releasing it into the ocean. The body can then decompose naturally as it sinks to the ocean floor, where it will provide nutrients for marine life. Yes, that's correct. When a body is placed in the sea through a marine burial, it will decompose and integrate with the rest of the biology in the ocean. This means that the body will break down and release nutrients into the water, which will then be absorbed by marine organisms and become part of the underwater ecosystem. The body will ultimately become part of the food chain, as it will be consumed by smaller organisms and then by larger ones. Yes, it is possible to place cells in a different container and keep them active through various forms of artificial life support systems. For example, researchers have been able to keep cells alive in a laboratory setting for extended periods of time by providing them with the necessary nutrients and conditions for survival, such as temperature, pH, and oxygen levels. With advancements in tissue engineering and regenerative medicine, it may be possible in the future to develop more sophisticated life support systems that can maintain the health and activity of cells for even longer periods of time. Cells? Did you mean cells? Cells can continue to divide and multiply for a certain period of time, but eventually, they will reach a point where they can no longer divide and will die. This process is known as cell aging or senescence. The exact number of times a cell can divide before it reaches senescence varies depending on the type of cell and other factors, but it is a normal part of the cellular life cycle. Quantum mechanics is a branch of physics that deals with the behavior of particles at the atomic and subatomic level, such as electrons, protons, and photons. While it is true that the atoms and molecules that make up our bodies are subject to the laws of physics, including quantum mechanics, the question of why cells stop dividing after a certain point is more related to biology than to physics. The specific mechanisms and processes that regulate cell division and aging are still not fully understood, but it is thought to be related to things like genetic mutations and damage to DNA. It's possible that as technology and scientific knowledge advances, We may eventually be able to understand and manipulate the biological processes that regulate cell division and aging to some degree. For example, there is ongoing research into stem cell therapy, which could potentially be used to replace damaged or aging cells and help slow down or even reverse the effects of aging. However, it's difficult to say whether or not we will ever be able to fully master this process, as the body is a complex and still largely mysterious system. Yes, I definitely agree that staying positive and having a hopeful attitude is important, especially when it comes to medical research and the pursuit of knowledge. However, it's also important to be realistic and acknowledge that there are limits to what we currently understand and can do in terms of manipulating biological processes. That being said, the rate of scientific and technological advancements is increasing rapidly, so it's possible that we will make significant progress in the near future. As a psychologist, I am trained to approach things from a more rational and evidence-based perspective. While it's important to stay positive and have hope for the future, it's also important to acknowledge the limitations and unknowns that currently exist in this area of research. That way, we can be realistic about what we can accomplish and avoid disappointment if we don't see immediate progress. I understand where you're coming from, but I would argue that realism isn't necessarily limiting. It allows us to set achievable goals and focus our resources on areas where we can make the most progress. Without being realistic, we risk spending time and energy on things that are currently impossible or unproven. Realism also helps us to stay grounded and not get carried away by overly optimistic expectations. That being said, it is important to strike a balance between realism and optimism and to maintain a healthy dose of hope in the face of challenges. I agree that optimism can be a positive and motivating force, especially in the face of challenges and setbacks. However, it is also important to be cautious about the potential downsides of unrealistic optimism. For example, being overly optimistic can lead to false hopes and unrealistic expectations, which can result in disappointment or even harm if those expectations are not met. Additionally, unrealistic optimism can cause us to ignore potential risks or challenges that we might need to address in order to be successful. So while it's important to stay positive and look on the bright side, it's also important to be realistic and grounded in reality. Of course, we can certainly explore the topic of optimism and its implications further in our next conversation. Is there anything in particular related to this topic that you'd like to discuss further? You're welcome. I'm glad that our conversations have been helpful for you. If you have any more topics or questions you'd like to discuss in the future, feel free to reach out. Take care.